Welcome to today's lesson where we're looking at Porter's diamond model. So the model is used by businesses to analyze the external competitive environment. This information can then explain the relative strength of one business against another, and it also explains why some industries are more advantageous than others in a particular region. Now, in the model, Porter attempts to answer the following questions. Why does one nation become the most competitive for a certain industry? Now, in the model, Porter refers to this as becoming the home base. So, for example, Germany is a home base for car manufacturing. And the second question is, why are companies from one country or region able to sustain competitive advantage in a particular industry? In the diamond model, the answers to these questions are the determinants of competitive advantage. So, according to the model, there are 4 factors that determine national competitive advantage. Porter represented these 4 determinants as a diamond, as you can see in the diagram. Now, you can think of the 4 determinants as being the playing field for the industries of a particular nation. And the 4 determinants are factor conditions, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. Now, these are the major determinants in the model, but they're not the only ones. The model also shows that there are 2 extra determinants that can influence any or all of the 4 determinants, and these are government policy and chance conditions. So let's look at each of the 4 determinants in turn. So factor conditions refer to the different types of resources that may or may not be present within a nation. Now, resources include such things like human resources, capital resources, natural resources, infrastructure, that kind of thing. Now, to understand the role of factor conditions, we need to make a distinction between basic and advanced factor conditions. Basic factor conditions include things like natural resources and unskilled labour, whereas advanced factor conditions include things like skilled labour, specialist knowledge, specialist capital. Now, Porter argues that basic factor conditions do not generate competitive advantage, and that's because they can actually be obtained by anyone if they just apply money to the problem. Now, only advanced factor conditions can generate real, true competitive advantage. So, as an example of an advanced factor, MIT produces graduates with very high computing skills, and this in turn feeds a software competitive advantage for the United States. Now, another factor for the US is having a large pool of venture capital seeking to invest in technology startups. And this factor condition further builds competitive advantage for the IT or tech industry in the US. So number 2 is demand conditions. And the main factor of demand conditions is really home market demand. So to have a competitive advantage for an industry, there must be very strong home market demand for the product or service that these companies are producing. Now, in fact, the more demanding home market customers are, the greater the pressure on companies to innovate and to improve. And these demand conditions create a competitive advantage for that nation over time. Now, demand conditions include things like market size, market growth rate, and also the market sophistication. And another factor which can determine demand conditions is early home market saturation. So early home market saturation can encourage people to innovate to keep selling. So number 3, related and supporting industries. Now, the success of one industry can be dependent on the success of related industries or suppliers within that nation. Now, the presence of internationally competitive suppliers can be helpful to the company using those suppliers, and that's because it gives cost-effective access to inputs, and alongside this, it gives early access to new products and encourages the rapid sharing of information, perhaps because they share the same language. Now, having lots of related industries within a nation sometimes results in brand new industries. And that happens where the related industries can share resources. So, for example, car manufacturers in Germany could share access to a wind tunnel, and this use of shared resources within a nation can create a competitive advantage as it increases the barrier to entry for competitors. So finally, number 4, firm strategy, structure and rivalry. Now, the competitiveness of firms in one nation is determined by how those firms set strategy and structure themselves. It's also determined by how much competition there is between firms in the industry. Now, how firms are structured and set goals is going to differ from nation to nation, and it's determined by a whole bunch of things, including social factors, political factors, legal factors, a whole bunch of other things. Now, intense rivalry causes a drive to innovate. So, as an example, German car manufacturers BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen wouldn't be so successful without the existence of each other, because the intense rivalry drives innovation and makes them successfully internationally. So while describing Porter's diamond model above, we touched upon the German car industry, but now let's use it for a complete example. So to understand the national competitive advantage that the German car industry have, let's look at each of the 4 determinants in turn. Now, it's worth noting that they don't exist in isolation, they all interact with each other. So first, let's look at factor conditions. So one factor condition that exists to make the German car industry competitive is the existence of specialist education establishments. Now, these establishments produce graduates with a specialism, obviously, in car engineering. Now, being a global centre for engineering excellence keeps the industry evolving at a rate that is difficult for competitors to keep up with. Next, demand conditions. Now, there's strong and intense home demand for German cars, with consumers expecting better and better cars all the time. And also, on some autobahn, there is no speed limit, and this causes demand for cars with ever greater performance levels. And this, intense demand combined with high expectation keeps competition high, and it's this furious competition that forces the industry to constantly evolve and makes it competitive internationally. Number 3, related and supporting industries. Now, there's many related industries and suppliers within Germany, but just one example is IT suppliers such as Siemens and SAP. Now, these firms themselves have a global competitive advantage, but by working together with these firms, the car industry can enhance its national competitive advantage even further. Because now they don't just have excellent engineering, but they also have excellent IT, and that raises the bar of entry for competitors even higher. It makes it even harder for them to enter the market. And finally, firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. Now, an intense intercompany rivalry between firms such as Mercedes, BMW, and Volkswagen feeds rapid innovation as each firm competes for the attention of customers. And finally, number 5, government. And this is one not to be overlooked in the success of the German car industry. And that's the role of government in that success. Now, the government has invested in creating and funding institutions that perform scientific research, and those same institutions train the best engineers. Now, the government has also invested in infrastructure. So by building new autobahn without speed limits, that helps intensify home demand conditions. So by satisfying all determinants in the Porter Diamond model, the German car industry has built a sustainable national competitive advantage. And this competitive advantage is further reinforced with the help of the German government. So there are some criticisms which are often levelled at the Porter Diamond model, including the model was developed by examining just 10 developed countries, and because of this, the model only applies really to developed countries. There is much evidence also to show that the national competitiveness of a nation is influenced by factors which are outside that nation, and that's, I think, pretty obvious. Thirdly, not all firms which begin in the home country are successful, and that suggests that there may be other factors in play. And finally, and I think this is the biggest one, it's not clear how the model applies in today's service economy. So, for example, how can the model be used to analyse the success of McDonald's or Burger King? So, in summary, the Porter Diamond model is a strategic economic model that attempts to explain why one nation state is more successful than another for a particular industry. Now, according to the model, for an industry to have a national competitive advantage, 4 determinant factors must be present. And additionally, the actions of government and chance can play a role in determining if an industry achieves a competitive advantage. So that's it for today's lesson. Really hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.